Today on the podcast, we're sitting down with Abby Gross from Right On with Miss G, who's become known for her thriving reading program and the wonderful tools she's developed to support other teachers with their own reading programs. I enjoyed our conversation so much. This is truly a value-packed episode. I love Abby's practical, doable, and fun advice for building more reading and book PR into your weekly routine. Get ready for quickly actionable tips on building strong book trailer and first chapter variety programs, creating book posters and brochures your students can really use, selecting and organizing your classroom library, and rolling out fun hybrid book tastings on the regular. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more creativity, more engagement, more joy. And no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Well, welcome to the show, Abby. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Today, we're going to explore a topic you've become really well known for, and that is choice reading. I always really enjoy seeing the many things you do to build a reading culture into your classroom. And so I thought we could start by setting the scene. Let's say that one of our listeners walked into your classroom tomorrow with all of your students and they started to look around. What evidence would they see on your walls, on your shelves, on your whiteboard, just all around? How would they see your choice reading program in action?
I love this question because I think and I know the first thing they would see is all the books. And that's always the first thing people comment on, whether it's new students or kids who I don't even have in class who just pop their heads in, or parents at open house. The books are basically my theme of my classroom. So they would see our classroom library overflowing with books. They'd see more books on display throughout the classroom. They would see books, posters of books hanging up on the wall, my book recommendation posters. They'd probably see a display on the whiteboard. They would see my book recommendation brochures. I mean, it would be hard to miss that this is a reading classroom and what we do is reading. And I love that. I've had like classroom themes in the past before, but the last couple of years, I've just let books become the theme because they can kind of do all the hard work for you and get readers curious and just invite everyone into your classroom. So I think that's the first thing people would notice. And then if they walked in during the first 10 minutes of class, they would notice kids really engaged in their reading and every kid reading a different book. And they would hear kind of that just peace and quiet of reading, which it takes a long time to get to that point. But at this point in the year, that's what they would see. So I always kind of love when someone pops in and my kids are just totally engaged in their independent reading books.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge win. Everybody's just immersed in their book.
Yeah, but then I'm always like, I promise we do more than this. Like I'm teaching and I'm doing things behind the scenes. But yeah, right now they are just chilling and reading.
What a delight. I thought it would be fun to sort of narrow our focus down to the classroom library because I've seen your classroom library lots of times on Instagram and it's so amazing. So I want people to be able to learn from it. And so I want to ask, like, how do you structure your library? How are your priorities when you pick out books for it? And then how do you keep redirecting kids back to it over and over and over?
Yeah, so to answer this question, I think I'll kind of backtrack on my classroom library journey because it hasn't always been this beautiful organized library that you might see if you looked at my Instagram today. So a couple of years ago when I first made the switch to teaching middle school, so I started my career in high school and I have to admit I did not do much with independent reading then. And I had a classroom library, but it was disorganized and it was just kind of sitting there. It wasn't really used as a tool. But when I jumped to middle school, I thought, you know what, I want to get these kids to love reading. So I knew I would have to have a classroom library and do more with it. But my first year of teaching, I was in a new grade level. It was COVID and we were all worried about the germs of the book. So it was a hot mess. And my classroom library reflected that. There was no sense of organization. It was just a collection of books. And it was fine for its purpose back then. But as I started to notice what my readers needed and what they were asking for and kind of the process of how we used our classroom libraries, I realized that I needed some organization because I had nothing. So the first big change I made was organizing by genre. And I had seen other teachers do this, and I just realized kids would come to me asking for a dystopian book or for a novel in verse or a graphic novel. and I didn't have a system in place to easily retrieve that book. So I knew genre would be a natural starting point for organization, and it was a game changer. So I think it's so much easier for readers to find exactly what they need when you have your library divided up into genres. So I made that change, and then I also implemented finally a system for organizing my book checkouts. I use BookSource, which is a fabulous free tool. But then from there, I've just made small changes based on what I notice students are needing. So just kind of a really responsive approach. I'm, big believer that your classroom library or your classroom in general does not need to be perfect on day one, but that you can make changes as you see what kids need. So another change I made after seeing how well the genre organization worked, I noticed kids would also ask me for topics like survival stories. So I started making some like topic-based book bins and kind of displaying those on top of our shelves. And again, those I create them, I switch them out based on what kids are asking for. So I think you can really take the lead from your readers and kind of troubleshoot what are they asking for, or also like what problems are you having with your classroom library? What are you getting frustrated with, or what are you not able to help your readers with enough? And then you can reflect on those and make changes. So I feel like I change a little something every year. And I've just added more topic bins and tried to have what I have in my classroom library complement some of my other resources, like my book recommendation posters or my book recommendation brochures, things like that. So that's how I structure it. As far as my priorities with it, it's always quality over quantity. And even though I have many, many books in my classroom library, I think to teachers who are starting from scratch, I would much rather have like a collection of 100 really high interest, tried and true, good books than, 500 so-and-so books or whatever it is. So I think just really focusing on the best books and making sure I'm prioritizing books that are filling gaps in my library, having a really diverse, inclusive collection. And then as far as the last part, I think was, how do I keep kids exploring it? Was that your
Yeah, that's
question?
right. Keep redirecting them back.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to listening to their needs, and I like to switch up my displays. It doesn't need to be a big production or anything fancy. I'm not one of those teachers who likes to redo my bulletin boards every month, but I am more than happy to like reorganize my book bins, or, just when the kids are reading every day in class. Sometimes I'll go pull books and make some stacks or displays, and just finding ways to get the kids to notice the books that have been there all along. It's always crazy. Like, for example, we just did a nonfiction book tasting to launch our nonfiction unit. And kids have not really touched the nonfiction section at all this year or even last year. And there's a million good books in there. It wasn't until I brought the books to them in a book tasting and kind of shoved them in their faces and made a little activity around it that they actually noticed them. And they're all reading and enjoying nonfiction. And like I said, they had not touched that. So you really have to get creative with bringing the books to the readers, getting them in their hands, because you can't expect that the readers will always happen upon them and find them.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. And it's a great segue into my next question, which was going to be about book tastings.
Oh, perfect.
I've seen book tastings run in so many different ways. I love them and all their manifestations. I wanted to ask you kind of how do you structure it in your classroom? What are some of the types of book tastings that you've done?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I focus more on the books than the tasting part of it. I know some teachers go all out with the tasting theme, and I probably do like one kind of fancy book tasting a year, maybe. Like I know in the past I've done a little hot chocolate book tasting in the wintertime. So you can really play up that tasting theme, But for me, it's more of a book sampling. So I like to do book tastings frequently, and for me to actually commit to doing them frequently, it needs to be simple and it needs to be sustainable. So I usually just grab a selection of books for whatever that topic or that genre or that theme is, and I'll put them on display. Typically I use my whiteboard, but sometimes I will create like a bookstore-esque display that's really inviting, again, just to get them noticed. And then we will do different rounds where the kids find a book. And then I usually use my favorite questions. What do you notice? And what do you wonder, to kind of structure that book tasting? Again, it's so open-ended, it can kind of really work for any genre. So when we did our nonfiction book tasting the other day, kids were able to notice things about the content, but also like the text features and the writing style. And then that leads in perfectly to what we're doing and how we're studying those texts. So I would say I keep it really simple. But one thing I do differently than a lot of the book tastings I see other teachers doing, I usually incorporate a digital element. So I call my book tastings like hybrid book tastings because we have the books in person because nothing beats, paging through physical copies of books. But then I almost always include like a digital menu of links to book samples on Overdrive. So I can let some kids love reading ebooks and audiobooks, and I like to always give them that option. And then that also allows me to really expand book access and kind of link to some books that I might not have in my classroom library, but I know maybe the public library has it or the school library has it. And so it's also just a really good way to help the kids branch out and learn to use their resources because they're not always going to have my classroom library. And I want them to know how to use a library card and know how to log onto Overdrive and Libby. So I really like that. And some kids, like I said, really get into clicking around on the menu and looking at the samples. And if you're unfamiliar with Overdrive, even if you don't have an account or a library card, just the general overdrive.com, you can check out samples of books and you can usually read the first chapter for free or like the first 5 minutes of an audiobook. So I use that as a resource in my classroom for book tastings all the time. I think it's fabulous and it's free, and I'm always trying to get more teachers to use that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic resource. Did you also, do I recall that you brought in the local librarian? Are your kids hooked up with library cards?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I'm actually planning for another visit this year. Our local librarian is amazing, and they have so many resources for teachers. But the first thing I did once I realized how awesome they were, I got every kid set up with a library card. In the past, I think my first year of teaching middle school with independent reading, I just got them signed up for digital e-cards, which those are an option probably for some teachers listening if you don't have the time or the resources to connect with your local library. Typically, a lot of states, like I know at least Ohio, there's an Ohio digital library card, and you can get that just with a phone number. Sometimes you don't even need that. But yeah, I got all the kids set up with the library cards through our local library. They did a little presentation on how to use the library catalog and some of their databases and Overdrive, and it was fabulous. But now I'm bringing them back because some kids have forgotten their PIN numbers and things like that, and they just kind of need a little refresher and reminder that they have all these books at their fingertips.
That just fills my heart with joy. The thought of
I mean,
collaborating with the local library is
yeah.
just the best.
And I
Very
know I'm
cool.
lucky to have a library right down the street and awesome librarians, but I would have never known unless I reached out and just tried.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've lived in a lot of places, and everywhere I've gone, the library staff has wanted to be helpful and they want to connect
Hmm.
people with books. And I
Yes.
can't really imagine a local librarian being like, "Oh, you want 60 kids to have cards? No."
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Right.
don't want
You're
that.
on your
Yeah.
team. Yeah.
If they can make it
Yeah.
happen, I believe that they will want to. It may be impossible, but I think it's so worth asking.
Yes.
Okay, well, speaking of hybrid, and I think that's such a great thing to suggest to teachers, the idea of a hybrid book tasting. I love that. But I also wanted to ask you about another digital book resource that you've really been a pioneer for, and that is the idea of using book trailers in class. You've brought this idea into the teacher world of Book Trailer Tuesdays, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. So I was hoping you could walk us through it.
Yes, I love Book Trailer Tuesday because, first of all, it's as simple as it sounds. Every Tuesday, I just press play on a fabulous high interest book trailer on YouTube. And if you've never seen one of those, there are so many. But it was just a way, like I had started first chapter Friday, and of course, Fridays are always fun. But I was like, I want to have this same bookish magic and excitement earlier in the week, and why not on Tuesday, right? Tuesday is
Yeah.
like the new Monday. We could all use some extra joy on a Tuesday like today. So I just thought it would be a great way to kind of complement what I was already doing with first chapter Friday and just to expose kids to more books. And honestly, both Book Trailer Tuesday and first chapter Friday, I started those when, like I said, it was my first year in middle school. I myself didn't really know much about like middle grade books, and I hadn't read young adult books in a while. So it was kind of my attempt to force myself to jump back into that world and like familiarize myself with all the titles. And I realized that Book Trailer Tuesday and First Chapter Friday were the perfect way to do it. So if teachers are listening, they, don't really have much time to read those types of books, even if you're not reading the whole books, you can still show book trailers. You can still read first chapters and still recommend books to your students. So I love Book Trailer Tuesday so much, and I think it's really so easy because most of these trailers are 60 seconds. So the whole process of showing a book trailer, and then what I always do after is just a quick poll to see how interested my students were. The whole process takes 2 to 3 minutes. So I like to say, like, every teacher, I know we're all busy, every teacher has 2 to 3 minutes a week to devote to books. And if you are committing to that every week, that's 36 new books a year. If you're compounding that with a strategy like First Chapter Friday, that's 72 new books a year. And when you really start to think about how many books you're exposing your kids to on a daily, weekly basis, that's a lot of chances for a kid to fall in love with a book. Like, I'm not a math teacher, but I love those odds. I think out of 36 chances, they're going to find a book that they like or a book that they don't hate. For some of those, I'm like, if you can tolerate a book, that is fine for me. So I think it's great. It's a great starting point, especially for any teachers who maybe have heard of First Chapter Friday, but don't know if they can commit to that. It's a great way to kind of dip your feet into these strategies. Like I said, it takes 2 minutes. And I also, because I was scrambling to find a trailer every Tuesday morning, I decided, let me sit down and actually organize a plan for the whole year. I created a plan of Book Trailer Tuesday links for the whole year for middle school and for high school. And it's actually a freebie on my blog. You can also get it through my Instagram. So I like to try to tell teachers, like, there's really no excuse. I've done all this work and found all these trailers, and it's like the easiest thing you could do. So I'm always like, well, I dare you to try it and then see how excited kids get. Because again, the books can be on my shelves. I could be talking about a book, but there's something about a book trailer that just gets kids excited to read.
Yeah, I really agree. And the fact that you've put together links for the entire year at all the secondary grade levels, like, people need to be signing up for that. We will link it in the show notes. That's fantastic.
And there's so many trailers. So I have like books or links for the whole year and then bonus links. And I need to update it soon to reflect all the new books that have been published in the last year, because there is no shortage of book trailers.
That's fantastic. Well, loving that. But then now moving on, because I wanted to talk to you about another of your wonderful strategies for pulling kids in with books, and that is your book brochure strategy. And this is something you've developed. I feel that it's very repeatable. I think the teachers could try to make their own book brochures or bookmarks, or they could go and get yours. So can you just kind of walk us through this idea?
Yes. So I love giving book recommendations. I love getting book recommendations. And I think most of us English teachers do. It's like my favorite part of the job is just sharing book recs. I wish I could do that all day long, right? And just talk about books. But unfortunately, I can't. And after our 10 minutes of reading are up every day, we've got to do things and get to our lesson. And I just found that I wanted a way to kind of automate the process or like streamline it or give kids a way to become a little bit more independent with their book selection process. So I created these book brochures, and they're organized by genre. So like I have a book brochure for dystopia, I have one for realistic fiction, all the genres. So they complement the way my library is organized. And when the kids open up the brochure, they get a little reader personality quiz. So it has questions like, which topic sounds the most intriguing, and where would you like your book to be set, and what kind of main character or narration or what point of view, different questions about the books. And I honestly designed these personality quizzes to kind of mimic the conversations that I would naturally have with readers anyways. Like if in a perfect world, I could sit down and chat with a kid one-on-one for 5 minutes about what they want to read, I just put that into those quizzes. So I love little personality quizzes. I think they're fun to make. But anyways, when the kids take those quizzes, the brochure automatically recommends one of 6 books to them based on their answers. So it's kind of like this instant tailored book rec. And then they can open up the book brochure, and there are the 6 featured books with like no spoilers summaries to get them excited. And then on the back, there are 25, 30 bonus recommendations. So like you said, I think teachers can definitely repeat this, and all of my book brochures are editable. So you can like swap out your own titles and your own favorite books. But teachers could, make a book brochure that's like Miss Gross's favorite books, or here are books for kids who hate reading, or what to read if you like The Hunger Games. So there's kind of different ways you can spin those. And like I said, they're really fun to make. They do take a bit of time because you have to create the questions and do the summaries. But if you wanted to save time, you could probably get summaries from Goodreads or Amazon and just make your own versions, or even have kids, like as a final project, make their own
Ooh.
book brochures, and then you'd have that resource for all of your future students. You could also, I have these like editable visual book recommendation posters. And again, you could create your own list, like your own little book stacks of your favorite books or books that you'd recommend to students, or have students create those too. I actually am planning on doing that with my kids at the end of this year, having each kid like create a digital book stack of their favorite books of the year. And then I can print them out and have them in like a little binder of the class of 2024,
Aw.
and always have that kind of like as a memory for me, but also
Yeah.
for my future students to see, okay, here's the books that the kids liked, not just the books that your teacher is recommending, but the tried and true favorites. So I think there's just a lot of creative ways to recommend books to your kids. And I love finding just new ways to do it because, like I said, you have to get the kids to notice the books
Yeah.
in some way or form, because they don't always just wander the shelves and come across the perfect book. You have to support them in that.
Oh, yes. I couldn't agree more. These are so many wonderful ideas.
Thank you.
As we're starting to move toward wrapping up, I wanted to ask you a question that I think is often on busy teachers' minds. And that is the question of trying to keep up, trying to read through so many books. And you've touched on it a little bit already, that teachers can use first chapters and book trailers without actually having read the entire book. But I know that being a reader of middle grade or YA or fantasy or whatever you're recommending, it definitely helps. It helps a teacher develop their program. And so I'm just curious, like, what do you say to teachers who are just kind of stymied by the idea of getting started with reading the books that they want to be recommending to kids because they just don't feel like they have time?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the $1,000,000 question. And first, I'll say I've been there. I have had teaching years where I have been so busy and overwhelmed that I've barely picked up a book for my own pleasure reading, let alone thought about, like, okay, here's a young adult book that my kids would like. So I get it. But I also would say on the flip side, when you're in that spot and you're feeling so busy and you don't know how you could possibly make more time for reading middle grade or young adult or whatever books you want to recommend to your kids, I think you're also in the perfect position to try and to start your own reading journey, because like you said, it's going to make you a better teacher. And if you're, every year I get kids who hate reading and haven't read a book in years, or the last book they liked was Diary of a Wimpy Kid or Captain Underpants or whatever. If I'm asking those kids to suddenly read every day and enjoy it too, it's going to help if I have gone on that journey and figured it out myself and figured out, well, what works for me and how can I fit reading back into my life? Because there were years when I thought, like, there's no way, I'm too busy to read. But now that I've kind of gone on that journey and, entered into the wonderful world of ebooks and audiobooks, I've realized that it is possible, no matter how busy you are. And I would recommend to those teachers, set a really small but achievable goal. Maybe it's like one book a month and you're using audiobooks to get there. If you listen to an audiobook on your way to and from school, or while you're doing the dishes or the laundry or any of those chores that you hate, you can easily get through, one young adult book a month. And maybe even start reading novels in verse, something like really easy to read.
Yeah.
Just having one book in your back pocket to show kids, like, hey, I'm reading this. I am making an effort. The kids notice that. They respect that. And a little goes a long way. So I don't think teachers need to read all the books. I read a ton of young adult books because I genuinely enjoy it. But I don't think all teachers need to do that. But I think making an effort is really, really helpful, not just for recommending books, but for reflecting on your own reading journey and figuring out how to replicate that in your classroom. Because you can just look at all the things you're doing as a reader to read more, to pick the right books. How are you getting book recommendations? You're probably getting them from your friends or from Instagram. And also things just like thinking about what you want your kids to do after they read. Well, after I read a book, I usually don't like to go write a book report on it. I like to just talk about it, right? And share it with the world in a natural way. So it really kind of makes you pause and think, am I asking these kids to do things that real readers don't do? And if you are, think about what you do as a reader. And it really, really helps.
That is a fantastic answer to a very difficult question.
Yeah,
Well
I hope
done.
that. it's easier said than done, and like I said, I've been there, but I'm also on the other side of it, so I feel like I have both perspectives.
Yeah, which is really helpful. I mean, because it gives a lot of hope for people who are feeling quite challenged by this issue.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask, kind of as we come to a close, is there anything that you think people tend to overlook when it comes to building a choice reading program? They get excited, they get their books, they roll it all out. Like, is there something that it's easy to miss?
Yeah, I think kind of like we've chatted about, it's, you can have all the books in your classroom. You can have a fabulous, well stocked, diverse classroom library, and you can even have the time in your schedule and you can say, hey, I'm going to give kids 10 minutes a day. You can have those two ingredients, which I would say are must haves. But if you stop there and you just kind of throw some time and just expect the kids to stumble upon these books that are in your classroom, even if they're right there, I think some teachers want to do that and they forget that there's so much going on behind the scenes and supporting the students, and all these strategies that we've talked about and building this culture of reading, which involves getting kids invested in books, but it also involves kids interacting with each other and having conversations, even during independent reading, like making independent reading community based, even, though it is an independent activity. I think some teachers can get frustrated if you're just giving kids time and saying, okay, grab a book, make sure you have a book every day. You might lead a couple kids to love reading. It might naturally happen, and that's great. But for most of the kids, and especially for the kids who are those really reluctant readers who have had bad experiences with reading or just simply don't know what they like in a book, it's probably not going to work for them. So I think focusing on what you're doing to recommend books and to support kids who don't even know how to pick out a book or don't even know genres. You really can't assume kids know how to do that, at least in middle school. But I would probably argue even in high school, there's kids who fall through the cracks and just haven't read a book in so long that they don't know what they like. So I think it's more than just the time and hoping it works. And it's really sticking it out. And even when it gets tough, like the first quarter, if you're trying to implement independent reading, the first quarter is tough. You're going to have kids who are protesting it, who are wanting to talk during the reading time. And you really just have to stick with it and have that hope and know that it will pay off. It might take the entire year for it to pay off, or it might take longer than that to where you don't see the results of your hard work, but it does make a difference. And I've seen it. And now I think I've mentioned this, but I'm looping with my students. So I have the same group of kids now in 8th grade that I had in 7th grade. And the growth that I've seen is just incredible. So it has really proven to me that it works. And some of the kids who hated reading the most at the beginning of last year are now my most voracious readers. And I know that sounds like too good to be true, but I've just seen it happen time and time again. So sticking with it and, devoting more than just the time in the books, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so fantastic and so inspiring. How wonderful. Well, any final words for us, Abby? Anything that I haven't asked that I should have asked?
You had fabulous questions, but I guess I would say with when this episode is coming out, whether it's the end of the semester or a new quarter or we're about halfway-ish through the year, I would just urge any teachers who have maybe wanted to try independent reading or who have tried it before and kind of flip-flopped or failed. Now is the best time to start. I'm a big believer. You don't have to start everything on day one. You can totally start something halfway through the year. And again, you're, I think, in the perfect position to do that because you can experiment, do trial and error, and then reflect at the end of this year and have a stronger independent reading program next year. So I would just urge anyone who's curious, anyone who's ever considered it, you can go all in for the rest of this school year. Why not? Why not give it a shot?
Yes. Yes, I support that.
Yes. I just think people get caught up with we have to have everything figured out on day one and all the expectations and the programs. But no, we can start new things and we can be vulnerable with our students and, explain to them, we're trying this out and we're going to work through it together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope teachers do that.
My first ever choice reading rollout was in May.
Really?
Yep.
That's honestly the perfect time to just try new things.
It
Why
blew
not?
me away. I was like, how have I not been doing this before? This is now going to be a part of every program.
I love
That
that.
was great. Well, thank you, Abby. Thank you so much for coming on. I know teachers are going to want to go sign up for the book trailers, and they're going to want to follow you on Instagram and see all your lovely bookish visuals in your classroom. So, where should they go?
Yeah, so on Instagram is where I hang out a lot, and then also my blog. If I'm ever talking about something on Instagram, or I think all the things that I talked about on the podcast today, I'm pretty sure I have a blog post for. I actually just blogged about book tastings. All of that is on rightonwithmissg.com. My Instagram is rightonwithmissg. So that's where I hang out. Also, if you like the idea of getting kids engaged in joyful, independent learning, whether it's independent reading or just any skill or subject, I also am the co-author of a book called Keeping the Wonder. So I have a lot of more information in that. You can find that on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Fabulous. Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining Abby and me today to talk about how you can bring fresh strategies to your choice reading program. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.